In the late 20th century, the world opened a will that shocked everyone. $12 million, set aside not for children, not for charity, but for a tiny dog. It was the final act of a woman who had lived like royalty, ruling over billion-dollar towers and marble palaces, feared by her servants and envied by the elite. Her fortune made headlines, her cruelty made enemies, and her last wish left the world wondering, how could so much power and wealth end in such strangeness? Leona Mindy Rosenthal was born in 1920 in Brooklyn, New York, to a modest, working-class Jewish family. Her father ran a small hat shop, and her mother struggled to keep the household together. From a young age, Leona resented the limitations of poverty. She wanted more wealth, more status, more recognition. As a teenager, she realized that appearances mattered in America. She changed her name repeatedly to make it sound more refined, more glamorous. Roberts, Mindy, even just Leona. Each identity was a mask she tried on, each one a step closer to the life she imagined for herself. Her sharp instincts led her into real estate. New York City in the mid-20th century was a battlefield of ambition, with skyscrapers rising, fortunes made overnight, and ruthless competition at every corner. Leona fit right in. She was aggressive, calculated, and unapologetic. If she lost a deal, she learned from it. If she won, she celebrated it by pushing even harder. What set her apart was not charm or elegance, but her sheer willpower. She was willing to intimidate, to manipulate, and to bend the truth if it meant coming out on top. By the late 1960s, she had already carved out a reputation for being relentless. Then came the turning point. Harry Helmsley, one of the most powerful men in American real estate. Harry owned iconic properties like the Empire State Building and sprawling office towers across Manhattan. When Leona met him, she found not only a husband, but also a partner who would catapult her into the stratosphere of wealth. Their marriage in 1972 marked the beginning of an empire. Together they expanded into luxury hotels, transforming bricks and steel into monuments of extravagance. The crown jewel was the Helmsley Palace Hotel, a towering symbol on Madison Avenue. Its marble halls, chandeliers, and gold accents reflected the couple's vision. A palace for the elite, with Leona as its reigning queen. She even became the face of the brand. Smiling in advertisements, she promised guests the personal touch of Leona Helmsley. But those who worked under her knew the truth. That smile was only for the cameras. By the 1980s, Leona Helmsley was living at the peak of power. She and Harry controlled billions of dollars in real estate, from skyscrapers to hotels, from Manhattan to Palm Beach. To outsiders, their world looked untouchable. But inside the Helmsley empire, cracks were beginning to show. Leona had become notorious for her cruelty. Employees spoke of her volcanic temper, her piercing stare, and the way she could reduce a grown man to tears with just a few words. Maids described being screamed at for folding towels the wrong way. Managers recalled being fired for errors as small as using the wrong pen color. She cultivated fear, and she wore it like a crown. But fear turned to scandal when investigators uncovered her financial secrets. The Helmsleys had been funneling personal luxuries through their businesses to avoid taxes. It wasn't just small perks. It was millions of dollars. A $2 million marble dance floor in their Connecticut mansion. A swimming pool surrounded by statues. Even jewelry and designer clothes. All billed as business expenses. The government saw it as fraud. In 1988, Leona and Harry were indicted on dozens of counts of tax evasion, conspiracy, and fraud. The trial began the next year, and the nation was riveted. The press called it the trial of the Queen of Mean. Witness after witness came forward, painting a portrait of arrogance and disdain. But one testimony stood out. A housekeeper, timid yet firm, told the jury that Leona once declared, "We don't pay taxes. Only the little people pay taxes." Those words exploded across the media. Newspapers plastered the quote on their front pages. Late-night comedians turned it into a punchline. But for the public, it was no joke. It confirmed what many already suspected, that the rich played by different rules, and that Leona Helmsley saw herself above the law. Her empire, built on marble and gold, was now collapsing under the weight of her own words. The trial of Leona Helmsley became one of the great spectacles of the late 1980s. Every headline, every evening newscast, every late-night joke revolved around the Queen of Mean. The nation watched in fascination, not only because of the money involved, but because her arrogance had made her the perfect villain. In court, prosecutors laid out the evidence in painstaking detail. They showed receipts for lavish renovations in her Connecticut mansion, charged to her hotel chain as business expenses. They revealed company records that treated designer dresses and million-dollar jewelry as if they were office supplies. Witnesses, from accountants to household staff, painted a picture of a woman who lived in unimaginable luxury while refusing to follow the same rules as everyone else. Leona's defense tried to portray her as a target of envy, a powerful woman being punished simply for being rich and ambitious. But the image of a ruthless, contemptuous queen was already fixed in the public mind. The prosecutors had one final weapon: her own words. The testimony of her housekeeper, that infamous line, "Only the little people pay taxes," was repeated again and again. The jury could not forget it. In August 1989, Leona Helmsley was convicted on multiple counts of tax fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 16 years in prison, later reduced to 4. She would ultimately serve 18 months behind bars at the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut. For a woman who once ruled over palaces, prison was a humiliating fall. Reporters described her standing in line for food, stripped of her designer gowns, reduced to wearing a plain uniform. No servants, no marble halls, no chandeliers, just concrete walls and the hum of fluorescent lights. When she was finally released, Leona returned to her penthouse in Manhattan. But the Queen's crown was gone. To the public, she would forever be remembered not for her empire, but for her downfall. After prison, Leona tried to rebuild her life. She remained enormously wealthy. Harry Helmsley's empire had survived, and she still controlled vast sums of money. But her reputation was shattered beyond repair. The press no longer called her the Queen of the Palace. She was forever branded as the Queen of Mean. She became a recluse, rarely appearing in public, her name synonymous with greed and arrogance. Yet behind closed doors, she still lived in luxury. Servants continued to tend to her every need. Her penthouse towered over Manhattan, a fortress of glass and steel where she could look down upon the city she once ruled. But the final twist in her story came after her death. On August 20th, 2007, Leona Helmsley died at the age of 87. When her will was read, it stunned the world. She left $12 million, not to her grandchildren, not to charity, but to her Maltese dog, a tiny white pup named Trouble. The decision caused outrage and disbelief. Her grandchildren were left with nothing, while the dog became one of the richest pets in history. Trouble required a bodyguard after receiving threats, and the courts eventually reduced the inheritance to $2 million. But the message was clear. Even in death, Leona Helmsley wanted control, and she wanted to make a statement. Today, her name is remembered less for the skyscrapers she owned or the hotels she built, and more for the legend she left behind. The woman who believed that laws were for little people, and who valued her dog more than her family. Her story remains a cautionary tale of unchecked wealth, of ambition turned to arrogance, and of how quickly a queen can fall. Leona Helmsley's story is not just about wealth or even about crime. It is about what happens when power and money are allowed to twist a person's sense of reality. She once stood at the pinnacle of New York society, living in palaces built of marble and gold. Yet in the end, she was remembered not for her empire, but for her cruelty. Her downfall revealed a deep truth about the late 20th century, that the gap between the rich and the ordinary had never felt wider. Her words, "Only the little people pay taxes," still echo decades later, a symbol of how arrogance can strip away humanity. Some called her brilliant, others called her ruthless. But history gave her only one title: the Queen of Mean. And in that title lies the irony of her life. She wanted to be remembered as royalty, a queen who ruled with elegance and power. Instead, she became a warning, a cautionary tale carved into the story of the American century. In the glittering rise and the humiliating fall of Leona Helmsley, we see both the seduction and the danger of wealth without limits.